Good morning to one and all. In the previous classes, we are discussed about geosynthetics and their properties and their functions in different areas compared to different alternative products. But today's class, we have to discuss the classification of these geosynthetics. That means number of varieties present in these geosynthetic materials and their utilities in different fields of construction. So that one by one we have to observe what are the different materials available in these geosynthetics materials. First of all, geosynthetics are a synthetic products. Normally synthetic means a man-made material. Organic means it will be given by the nature. So that synthetic materials are simply product produced in the industries itself, so that for the purpose of different needs and deeds of humans, where at least one of the components is made from a synthetic or natural polymer. Polymer means a number of combinations of monomers will give a polymer in the from a sheet or a strip or a three-dimensional structure. Non-woven, knitted or woven is used as a contact with the soil, rock and other structures. Here we are having different combinations. First of all, we are having a strip, that means a sheet means a layer. After that we are having strip means a piece of thread like structure, and a three-dimensional structure, that means it is simply like a box. And a non-woven, that means those are having some temperature related problems. And knitted woven, knitted means already it is also having some freezing and thawing effects related problems. And woven means it will bear huge amount of temperatural conditions. All those are having different properties which we have to face in the soils. Why? Because if we want to construct a road structure in hilly areas, definitely we have to face a different temperatures. If it is near to the, means if it is nearer to the some of the areas which is having less temperatures, so that it have to face some freezing effects. And it is nearer to the hot areas, it have to face some expansional properties. Depending upon those conditions, so we have to choose the material. So that all those are simply related to this field of geotechnical engineering, where we have to assess different problems with soils. First of all, a planar structures. That means planar structures means all the materials we have to construct in the small plane like structure. In those conditions we have to go for geomembrane, geotextile, synthetic barriers, nets, grids, strips, spacers, geomats, etc. All those are simply a layer like materials. Simply for in our household purpose, we are using different sheets for covering these tiles and other utility areas. Likely here also we are using these geomats, membranes, textiles. All those are simply a layer like structures. Those we have to utilize for our different purpose of protection of the soil due to different climatic factors and other structural factors. First of all, these three-dimensional structures we are having. These three-dimensional structures means some of the, in the previous case we are having only planar structures. This means only length and width they are having. The thickness is very low compared to their length and width ratios. But in case of these 3D structures, we are having length, width and some quantity of thickness. So that these simply there are geocells, geoforms, gabions and concrete filled matrices. Normally matrices means a pillow and a mattress we have to observe in our bedroom. Likely here also some matrices. Those are simply covering the total soil surface and giving protection from weathering and different erosional properties. In those geosynthetics, different combinations we are having. Normally polypropylene, it is a one of the polymer material. After that, we are having HDPE. HDPE means high density polyethylene and polyester. Next one, PVC, polyvinyl chloride, and synthetic rubber, natural fiber like jute and coir. In the last one, we have discussed in the previous class how these natural fibers will be installed in the site and what are the advantages we have to face while we are installing these natural fibers. Both jute and coir, they will decrease the total cost of construction and giving some natural properties to the soil without any damages. But one of the disadvantages is they are having less lifespan compared to other these polymers. Next one, geosynthetics. What is the function? That means in previous case we have discussed different compositions, and here we have to observe functions. First of all, separation. That means the total layer to layer separation will be takes place while we are using these geosynthetic materials. Why? Because the top layer and bottom layer we need to bifurcate. Why? Because that from the top layer we have to control the seepage of water from top to bottom or any other forces and disturbance in some of the cases. All those will be separated. Next one, drainage. Simply drainage means to control the flow of water from upstream to downstream. And filtration, simply whenever we are having a huge quantity of waste materials simply coming into the other structures, so that those materials they will separate by using these filtration techniques. Normally these filtration techniques will be useful in uh, merging of two rivers or any other two ponds or two canals. Likely here we have to differentiate the whatever the solid materials simply merging into the canals, and we have to decrease some pollution. And moisture barrier. Moisture barrier means these lands and these transporting roads have to bear huge amount of loads, so that some of the moisture will give a cracks. That means whenever the moisture is there, automatically swelling will be takes place. Due to those swelling, automatically the total land have to increase its volume. So to decrease those kind of unfeasible properties to the structure, we have to go for this moisture barriers. In some of the cases we have to go for these cushions. While the two materials are simply joining at those particular points, we have to go for these cushions for decreasing these enlargements. First of all, we have to observe this is the function of separation. On the first place, that means on the top of the surface we are having a coarse materials, and in the bottom structure we are having a soft clay, so that those two kinds of materials will be separated by using this geotextile layer. Okay, this is the major function of this geotextile, to separate two different materials and two different layers. And how those will be acting, that means simply we are having direction of these arrows from one point to another point, we are having simply flow, so that those will be useful for the purpose of drainage. That means those will be acting as a sponge, so that the total waste material which is having large molecules, all those will be staggered at a point, and the remaining only water content will be moved. In those conditions also they will be useful. Here we have to observe a separate structure is there. Those will be simply used for the purpose of filtration function and this geomembrane seepage barrier. Okay, here we have to observe the total structure. On the top we are having some huge quantity of voids. On the between structure we are having some less content of voids, and the bottommost structure we are having huge gaps between the stones. Why? Because depending upon their particle sizes, the void ratio will be depends upon. If the particle size is very high, automatically this void content also very high. First of all, the top layer we are having this natural soil. In this natural soil we are having the arrangement of particles, large and small particles are combinations is there. And next one is a filler zone. In those filler zone, normally we are using different waste materials, and after that we are having bridging zone. And the bridging zone, in the bottom of the bridging zone we are having a geotextile, so that whatever the matter or water coming from those top layers, those water will be separated by using these geotextiles without any entrainment. Is here we have on the another side we are having a small canal like structure, so that the total content of waters we have to divert into the canal. Why? Because if we want to do this diversion, automatically the water will absorbed by the soil, and this swelling, seepage, and increments will be takes place. Next one is the reinforcement. In some of the cases, these matrices, that means these materials will have to use for reinforcement purpose, simply to transfer stresses from one layer to another layer, and totally we have to zero. That means it takes these stresses to zero. First of all, on the top of the structure we are having a cube, so that the total weight of the cube will be transferred to this geosynthetic layer. Simply those layer we are calling as this reinforcement to the soil. On the other hand, we are having these facing elements, that means facing panels. Those panels simply we are used in the earth retaining walls, and previous chapter we are using these retaining walls, and in some of the cases we are having utilization of this reinforcement for the purpose of facing panels and other surrounding contact soils. This is the advantage of usage of these synthetic materials with this soil. Next one of those total geosynthetics are classified as different grades and materials. First of all, those grades are geotextiles. Normally, textiles means in our daily we are wearing these textiles. Normally, those textiles are made up of cotton, silk, uh, and different materials. Cotton normally we are using, and silk, and linen, and polyester. Those are the different types of these geotextiles. After that, we are having geogrids. That means a grid means a shape of X. We will utilize as a geogrids. And next one is the geonets. That means geogrid, the particle. That means the distance between the size to size will be very high in case of geogrids, and the geonets, the space is very less. And the next one is the geomembrane. Those will be simply acting as a layer which protects and which allows the water content. Next one, geosynthetic clay liners. These geosynthetic clay liners also have to observe their arrangement of layer by layers. And the geocells with the web members. After that, geoforms, geocomposites, geopipes, and turf reinforcement mats. All those things we have to observe one by one, and we have to discuss their functions in different fields. First of all, geotextiles. Any permeable textile is used with the foundation of soil, rock, earth, or any other geotechnical engineering related materials as an integral part of the human made project structure or system. And those characteristics are very porous in nature and allow flow of water through it. Most used as a geosynthetics. They may be either woven or non-woven conditions. Woven means they will bear huge amount of temperatures in sites itself. Non-woven means they will have to use for low temperature areas. Available in rolls of 5 to 5.6 meters wide and 50 to 150 meters. That means the length and breadth they are simply giving. 5.6 meters means normally width criteria, and 550 to 150 meters means their length will be ranges from a minimum of 50 and maximum of 150 meters long, and it is composed of different polymers. Normally, if it is a earthen material, due to this water content present and some other bacteria presence in the soil, those will be leached off in a natural period of time. So that here we are using this polymers, so that those polymers are not degraded easily due to this bacteria, so that they are having huge amount of lifespan compared to these natural fibers like jute and coir. And the materials they are using is polypropylene, HDPE, and polyester, polyethylene. And the functions is the separation, reinforcement, filtration, and drainage. Separation means that means to divide a top layer and bottom layer. In between those we have to use this geotextiles. And second one is the reinforcement, normally to transfer the stresses. Comparatively, this tensile stresses will be transferred by using this reinforcement. And next one is the filtration. The large particles will be filtered and the water will be drained through these geotextiles, and for the purpose of drainage also, to move particular quantity of water. So that here we have to observe, it is one of the example, that means the figure will show how the arrangement of textiles, especially here we have to observe this woven geotextile. Those will be uniform and regular interweaving of threads or ends to in two directions. That means both x direction and y direction we have to observe these two ends, and regular visible construction pattern. Regular visible means each way and every layer we have to observe. And the functions are simply soil separation, reinforcement, load distribution, filtration, drainage. And it have a high tensile strength and a relatively low strain. And next thing we have to observe is non-woven geotextiles. Those are formed by heat bondings, and the resin bondings are needle punchings, so that there will be no proper thread pattern. In the previous case, woven geotextiles, we have to observe a interlocking of threads takes place. But in the case of non-woven geotextiles, there may be no interlocking of threads. Simply they will be arranged in a zigzag pattern, forming as a certain layer. They are having a high strain and a stretch considerably under loading conditions. What their function is, first of all, they have to do this soil separation, stabilization, load distribution, but not used for reinforcement. Why? Because it is not useful for reinforcement. Simply there is no proper layer or bonding between the particles, so that it is not suitable for purpose of reinforcement. Next one, after completion of this geotextiles, we are having these geo grids. Normally grid means a block by block, block by block. The arrangement of blocks were called as a geo grids. They are having a open grid like configuration. They have a large appear between the individual ribs. That means each rib to rib they are having some individual ribs, and they have low strain and stretch about 2% under load conditions. Strength is more than other common geotextiles. In the previously geotextiles were having some quantity of strength under different loading conditions, but here geotextiles and the geogrids are having different properties of variances. And the functions, they may be mostly used for the purpose of reinforcement. It enhances the interaction between the soil and aggregate. In the previous case we have to bifurcate the two different soil properties, but here we are using totally two separate materials. On the one hand we are having soil, another hand is aggregate. To bifurcate those two, we are using these geo grids. And the third one is the geo nets. Geonet means geo means earth, and net means to protect the earth. We are using these kind of nets. These are formed by continuous extrusion of parallel sets of polymeric ribs. First of all, we are having LDPE, that means low density polyethylene, and the next one is the HDPE, high density polyethylene, at preset angles to one another. That means those are having some angle of inclinations with their bonding properties. and a design function is completely within the in-plane drainage area and where there will be some convey of all types of liquids. Convey means simply they will allow the liquids through those layers. So that simply they are called as a net. Normally in nets we are using in the purpose of catching fishes in seas and small rivers. Here also they simply using these geo nets for drainage purpose and catching a large particles through the use their drainage function, but they have high tensile strength. Normally we are using these geo nets for the purpose of drainage, as well as they are having high tensile strength properties, generally used for along with the two geotextile matters of one with another at the top and other bottom to prevent the intrusion. That means intrusion means one material with another material is not simply combining. Next is geomembrane. Normally, membrane means a layer by layer, layer by layer. Earth is also having different membranes like core, mantle, and crust. Those are different membranes of the earth. Likely here also, materials are relatively thin, impervious sheets. Thin means their that means their thickness is very high, and those are simply impervious. Those didn't allow water through them, so that those are called as a impervious sheets, generally made from a butyl rubber. Normally rubber is a polymeric material. After few days automatically those rubber also will have a tendency to mix with the soil. The sale of these geomembranes are greater than geotextiles and impervious than the sheets of rubber or plastic materials preliminary used for the purpose of lining and covers of liquids and solid impoundments. In the bottom figure we have to observe those structures of these geomembranes. Normally in different areas we are using, on the top of two figures we are having an importance, this and this figure and this figure we have to observe in a different areas. In cars also we are having these likely small rubber like materials, those are also simply these geomembranes. And next one is the geosynthetic clay liners. Normally geosynthetic clay liner is here. Simply a man was supervising the arrangement of these geosynthetic clay liners. That means clay liner means those are simply protecting the slope of clay materials. Normally clay particles are having very fine powdered material, and those fine powdered material will be eroded easily under the actions of wind and water and other natural calamities. To control those kind of erosional properties we have to invest some quantity of money against these top structures, so that these members simply drained the water content onto the fields easily and there will be no penetration of water. First of all, factory fabricated and bentonite clay is used. That means bentonite clay is sandwiched between the two geotextiles. Normally sandwich means a two lay in between the two different materials we have to arrange another material, that is called as a sandwich. We have to observe in a different ads. Sandwich means on the top and bottom we are having two buns, in between the two buns we are having some quantities of materials are arranging. Likely here also those two materials are simply sandwiched between these materials due to geotextiles, and structural integrity is obtained by needle punching function and containment as well as hydraulic barrier, including these thin layers of finely grained bentonite clay. Clay swells and becomes a very effective hydraulic barrier when wetted, and manufactured by sandwiching a bentonite with a layering of an geotextile geomembranes. Bentonite is a type of clay material. It is not a chemical, it is a type of clayey material. And different arrangements of these geosynthetic clay liners. Normally, these geosynthetic clay liners are sandwiched between the materials. Those arrangement will be shown here. That means on the top of the pot we are having one geotextile, and the bottom we are having another geotextile. In between those two layers of these geotextiles we are having this bentonite clay, so that those is simply a sandwich like structure, so that they are comparing simply sandwich with this structure. After that we are having another kind of membrane, simply a bentonite clay. After that we are having simply a geomembrane, bentonite glued to geomembrane. And next one we are having is this geocells or geo web membranes. Normally webs, in the purpose of spiders, they simply using these webs for the purpose of their food collection. Here also there may be some web like arrangement similar to the geotextiles and geogrids, but they are having some depth ratio. Normally geotextiles are having only length and width, but they didn't having depth. In case of this geo cells and webs, we are having the depth value. In the depth itself we have to fill different aggregates, so that those will be acting as a barriers. When opened from a bentonite, that means when opened these geo cells, simply they will be seen as a honeycombs. And like a structure and the containing soil, the gravel and the other forms of different soil conditions, the water through it mostly preferred for the purpose of utilizing in slopy areas to protect these erosional properties with soft subgrade erosion and controlled in channels. Similar to geotextiles we have to utilize here, but in case of these geo webs we are having some high depth and thickness values. And the next ones we are having is these geoforms. What are the geoforms? How they have to utilize? These geoforms are simply a large but extremely light materials with these gas filled cells made from expanded polystyrene and extruded from polystyrene by polymeric expansion process. Simply the function of these geoforms are separation. It means layer by layer they have to separate. After that a lightweight fill is there, and compressible inclusions, thermal insulation. On the last property we are having thermal insulation. That means the total heat whatever the surrounding atmosphere is having, those heat will not be transferred to the further layers. It is thermal insulation. And compressible inclusions, that means whatever the loads coming onto the soil, those loads will be simply neglected, or those loads will be simply zeroed due to this compressive force actions. And the separation means simply they have to utilize in a different layers. And what are the applications means those will be used within the soil embankments, and they have to build over a soft or weak soils. They need to be used in a different structures under the roads, comma airfields, comma railway track systems, which are subjected to exclusively freeze and thaw conditions. Normally freezing and thawing effects we have to observe in a different cold countries. Normally Britain and different areas we have to observe this freezing and thawing effects due to this air temperature variation. So that according to these conditions also we have to use the different kinds of materials. And next one is geo composites. Those are very factory fabricated unit with two or more synthetic components. They are be prepared in a extract all major properties of the geosynthetics into a single unit with minimum cost. Along with these geosynthetic materials, sometimes some non-geosynthetic materials are also very useful. In those geosynthetic combinations, we are having different combinations. First one is geotextile, which is related to this geonet and these components. After that, we are having geotextile with geomembrane composites. And next one, geotextile with geogrid composites. And the next one is a geomembrane with geogrid components. That means simply the geonet composites are same and the remaining materials are simply changing. First three conditions we are having geotextiles. After that, geomembrane and geotextile is varied with different materials, so that simply they are calling as a composite. Composite means the used materials are simply varying their properties, so that those materials simply we are calling as a composite materials. Combination of two materials we are calling as a composite materials. Next one we are having is these geopipes, not GIO, it is geopipes. They are also having some importance. Why? Because nowadays we are observing a lot of structures are simply constructing below the earth. You know, some of the examples are, in the olden days we are having these current cables above the ground level, but nowadays we are simply constructing these current cables below the ground level. Why? Because due to this thunders and other storms, simply a huge quantity of people are losing their lives by striking these current cables in the fields of agricultural, so that they are having some quantity of human loss. To overcome those kind of effects, simply we have to go for these geopipes, so that the total current wires or any other internet wires and other some quantities of pipelines for drinking and other cases, we have to utilize this mechanism. It is a simply plastic pipe prepared by using these resins and high density polyethylene materials and polyvinyl chloride, that means PVC pipes, polypropylene, polystyrene, etc. Those are included to leachate the removal systems. And interceptor drains, highways and railway edge drains. Why? Because in those particular areas we have to bear huge amount of loads exclusively in interceptor drains and highways and railways. We have to bear huge quantities of loads. To bear those kind of loads, simply we have to install these kinds of geopipes for production purpose and utilization purpose. After that, we are having turf reinforcement mats. That means simply those are used as a mats in our home. We are having these normal mats we have to observe. Those are simply three-dimensional structures composed of fused polymer netting, randomly laid monofilaments or ants woven into the open dimensionally stable mats, so that they have to utilize it for the controlling of erosion. And what are the different functions compared to these different areas? First of all, we have to observe we are having different materials. Those are geotextiles, geogrids, geonets, geomembranes, geosynthetic layers, geoforms, and geocomponents. And the different characteristics what we have to face is first of all we are having this separation. That means separation of two layers, reinforcement. That means that will give an excessive strength due to this utilization of materials. And the next one is filtration. That means whenever the water is moving throughout the structure, so that they have to filter, drainage purpose. Here we have to drain two different quantities of materials. And containment. In those areas also we have to utilize these different aids. First of all, geotextiles will satisfy majorly four properties. Those are separation, reinforcement, filtration, and drainage. But in case of geograde, it satisfies only a single condition, that is a reinforcement. Next one is geonet. It also simply satisfies one condition, that is drainage. Geomembrane also a containment, and the geosynthetic layer also having some containment property. After that, geofoam is having a function of this majorly separation only. But in case of geocomponents, all the five functions are satisfying by these geocomposites. Why? Because in the geocomposites we are utilizing more, normally two materials we are utilizing, either geotextile or geogrid or any other two materials, so that simply geotextile with the help of this geomembrane or geotextile with the help of these geosynthetic layers, so that they are satisfying all these five properties. So we have to focus our area is, that means in which of the particular area we are having this densification or ground improvement work, so that the particular location what properties we have to improve. According to those properties we need to utilize this kind of geosynthetic materials. Why? Because first of all we have to focus on what problem we are facing at that particular location. To overcome those problems, how we have to utilize these materials in an effective ways. And what are the different areas of applications of these geosynthetic materials? First of all, we are having in roads and pavements. Particularly, most of our Indian roads are having some damages due to these problems. Why? Because we are having this penetration of water and different separations, so that in roads and pavements we have to observe this kind of applications of geosynthetics. First of all, a subgrade separation in stabilization, comma, base reinforcement, overlay stress absorption, and reinforcements. All those conditions we have to utilize these properties of geomembranes and textiles. And the next condition is in subsurface drainage. Why? Because the total surface is utilized for purpose of different activities. In those conditions there may be no chance to construct a canal, so that simply they are using these subsurface drainage properties. So the total water or any other waste materials will be flowing below the ground surface. In subgrade dewatering, comma, road based drainage, structural drainage, hydraulic works for the construction of basins, dams, and canals. In all the above areas, we are utilizing these subsurface drainage conditions. Why? Because in some of the cases, the simply water is flowing from the ground level. That means above the ground level, there may be some problems we have to observe. Due to those problems, the total material will be simply polluted. To control those kind of pollution, simply we are arranging this groundwater below the ground. We are simply moving those materials to protect them. And next one is the tunnels. For the tunnels and underground works, we are utilizing these tunnels, geotunnels. In erosion and sediment control, the simply geomats, simply we are utilizing this controlling of erosion and sedimentation. Hard armor systems, silt fence to protect the shorelines, comma, slopes, channels, canals, landslides, comma, suspended slopes, and surface erosions. All those are simply controlled by using these geosynthetic layers. Next one, in some of the reinforced soil systems, means reinforced soil means we have observed the previous chapter is entirely related to this reinforced earth, to protect some earth materials the total stress we have to transfer from soil to the facing and facing to the bottom ground. In those cases we are using these reinforced soil systems. First of all, we have to construct a embankment over the soft foundations, and after that we need to give this reinforcement in the embankment by using these facing elements and other substructures. These steepened slopes reinforced soil walls for purpose of foundation supporting works and soft soil works we have to utilize. In seepage control systems, the structural waterproofing environmental protection will be takes place by controlling this seepage. In support systems, the prefabricated systems are simply utilizing on-site functions. These are the examples how we are protecting the slope by using these geogrids. It means totally we are having some quantity of depth. In the depth we are simply filling the concrete material so that they are having without reinforcement the total slope will be stabilized by using these geogrids. Those are simply constructing along the bridge abutment. Here also we have to observe the total slope is under falling conditions. To protect the slope of a particular hill or muddy area, they are using these geomats as a cover. Here also they are having some erosion due to these coastal lines. Those erosions simply they are protecting against these sloping areas. They are using installation of these geomats. On the geomats they covered some of the quantities of waste rocks. Simply geotextiles and geomats they are utilizing for the purpose of controlling this erosion due to the water. And these are the some of the economic importances of this geosynthetics, commonly accepted by durable, long lasting environmental free structures and geotechnical engineering projects they are utilizing. And their cost of geosynthetics is simply applied usually between 3 to 5% of the total cost of the projects. And for a number of projects saving 30% in total project costs have been reported. And it minimizes the regular repair and maintenance. If the structure is constructed after a few days we have to go for this repair techniques. In some of the cases we have to observe cracks and some chippings will be takes place. Those will be neglected whenever we are using these kinds of arrangements, and minimizes the regular repairs and prevents accidents. Increase efficiency of structures, minimize pollution, and leads to efficient usage of natural resources. And these are also some of the examples. The civil engineering structures they will need some long term durability to prevent potential ecological disasters like floods, drafts, earthquakes, and global warming means simply rising of temperature. And geosynthetics provide such a long lasting solutions with this minimum utilization cost. And these geotechs are simply difficult and impossible to degrade. That means impossible means for the purpose of degradation of these geopolymers will takes thousands of years. So that simply those are utilizing for every normal structure they are having a lifespan of 100 to 150, a maximum of 200 years, so that their degradation will not be takes place within the project life. Geosynthetics assist the environment by acting a containing barrier to the toxic materials. That means a containing barrier means simply those will not allow these toxic materials into the earth level. Why? Because the simply acting as a layers so that there will be no entrainment of these toxic materials. The envisaged functional lifespan will be geosynthetic serve extremely long, in many cases over 100 years. There will be no functional defects while we are utilizing in a proper way. And the geosynthetics provide sealing and capping of pollution due to these chemicals released after the road and rail accidents into the groundwater areas. This is the conclusion. Why? Because after the different case studies, we have to observe these things. The future appears to be more promising with a stronger and a more durable geosynthetics emerging into the market of along with the fibrous system to be mixed with the soil for giving more hope as well as a challenge to the geotechnical engineers in the years to become. But one of the it is the total conclusion, that means in the future of our earth, that means up to 2100, the total earth will have to utilize these kind of functions in major projects to control the erosional properties and increase the lifespans of the structures. But one major disadvantage in the particular thing is there will be no recharge of groundwater while we are utilizing these kind of structures. Why? Because the total structures are having some geonets and geomats. In case of geonets, there will be some penetration of groundwater, but in case of these geomembranes and layers, there will be no recharge takes place. Due to those less quantity of recharge, we have to depend upon some artificial resources for groundwater. Okay, this is the total topic. Thank you.